Police brutality has been a persistent problem faced by the African American community. African Americans have been targeted as victims of violence simply because of the color of their skin. Over the last 500 years, they have endured a pattern of violence and human rights abuse. Still today, the African American community is facing this problem, as seen in the case of Oscar Grant. On January 1, 2009, a former BART police officer, Johannes Messerly, fatally shot an unarmed civilian, Oscar Grant, in Oakland, California, and was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. In the early morning hours of New Year's Day, BART police officers detained several passengers, including Oscar Grant, on the platform at the Fruitvale BART station after receiving reports of a fight on the BART. Grant was prostrate and allegedly resisting arrest when Officer Messerly mistakenly drew his gun instead of his taser and shot Grant in the head. This scene was captured on multiple digital video and cell phone cameras by the public. It stirred up both peaceful and violent protests, especially in the African American community, as the footage was disseminated to mainstream society. January 13th, Messerly was charged with murder for the shooting. He resigned his position and pleaded not guilty. On June 10th, the trial began. Judge Perry, who was assigned the case, offered 3 conviction options: second-degree murder with a sentence of 15 years to life in prison, voluntary manslaughter, 3 to 11 years, or involuntary manslaughter, 2 to 4 years. On July 7, 2010, after 6.5 hours over the course of 2 days, the jury reached a verdict. Officer Messerly was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter and not guilty of second-degree murder and voluntary manslaughter charges. He was found guilty of a gun enhancement charge that could add up to 10 years to his prison sentence, making him eligible for probation and forcing him to serve 85% of his sentence, as opposed to the 50% most state prisoners serve. Messerly was remanded into custody until the next court date on August 6, 2010. After the verdict was announced, there were many peaceful gatherings held throughout Oakland. Messerly claimed he intended to fire his taser, but mistakenly shot Grant with a pistol when he thought Grant was reaching for a gun. He wrote a 2-page letter after the verdict expressing his great sorrow. For now and forever I will live, breathe, sleep, and not sleep with the memory of Mr. Grant screaming, "You shot me," and me putting my hands on the bullet wound, thinking the pressure would help, while I kept telling him, "You'll be okay." I tried to tell myself that maybe this shot would not be so serious, but I recall how sick I felt when Mr. Grant stopped talking, closed his eyes, and seemed to change his breathing. On November 5, 2010, Officer Messerly was sentenced to 2 years with double credit for time already served, reducing his term by 292 days for the 146 days he had already spent in jail. Judge Perry also overturned the gun enhancement, which would add another 3 to 10 years to the sentence. Officer Messerly will be eligible for release in about 7 months. After the November 5th verdict, the city of Oakland experienced isolated instances of rioting from angry residents who felt that Messerly had gotten off too lightly. On a Friday night's protest, Oakland police arrested more than 150 protesters as they broke windows and knocked down fences. Currently, Oakland police are bracing for the possibility of further violence from angry protesters.
And today we are discussing a very controversial issue. It has been observed that police and other security personnel target African Americans in our society simply because of the color of their skin. We feel police brutality is so prevalent in communities of color because racial profiling has become a major part of our criminal justice system. I experienced racial profiling firsthand last 4th of July when I was driving in a ghetto area of San Diego with my little brother, who is African American, and 3 of his friends who are also African American.
Spent the afternoon around Sproul asking people their thoughts and ideas on the recent sentencing of the officer who shot Oscar Grant. No one has known even who Oscar Grant is or anything about the situation. So are you aware of the recent sentencing of the officer who shot Oscar Grant?
Yeah. Actually, I work right next to the court where they announce the stuff and everything. And, I remember that day of the sentencing, one of the things that my boss let everyone do was, leave the office early because they were expecting riot. And, I understand why. I mean, they gave him, only, 2 months or something like that because he served time, so I think it's pretty much up. But then, what I was shocked to hear was, the same day they announced the sentencing and stuff, there was a lot of, African-American people that I noticed in the bus that they were really angry. They were just oh, well, he's gonna, pay for it, not, here in his lifetime, but later on when he dies. So I was pretty shocked to hear that, because I would have been mad had that been, I like it.
Do you think the outcome would have been different had Oscar Grant not been a black man?
I think if he had been white and, someone important, he probably would have gotten, more time, the officer.
So are you aware of the recent sentencing of the officer who shot Oscar Grant?
2 years, I believe it was.
Yes. So how do you feel that is fair? Why or why not?
Well, I personally am against prison, so sentencing people to prison is the whole prison system is wrong. I mean, we need to have a system of rehabilitation, and the guy clearly needs some serious rehabilitation, and that needs to be completely redesigned. So, do I think it's fair? I mean, do I think that that's maybe a better question would be, do I think that's in line with similar type crimes that if I believed in prison, would I say that 2 years was fair compared to other people who did similar things? Oh my God, of course not. I mean, Michael Vick basically got
For dogs.
killing dogs.
Yeah.
So, if killing a black man is the same as killing dogs, then I guess that's fair. If that's what this country thinks, then that's valid. But I think maybe that is what this country thinks. I mean, we have slave rapers on our money. We're a racist country.
And then our final question, do you think the outcome would have been different had Oscar Grant been a white man or other different?
He wouldn't have been shot. He wouldn't have been pulled off the train.
So are you aware of the recent sentencing of the officer who shot Oscar Grant on New Year's Eve 2009? So how do you feel about his sentencing?
I feel like if it was a person of color who shot Oscar Grant, the case would be I feel like the sentencing would be more so, he would probably get life,
Yeah.
So I feel like it was unfair. But I mean, what can we do now? I mean, we see we see the country that we're living in. We see the state that we're living in. I feel like people are just really colorblind. And I feel like an accident was definitely, I feel like when they said it was an accident, I was just surprised. But hey, what's good?
And then one last question, do you think Oscar Grant would have been shot in the first place had he been not African American?
I don't know. I really can't answer that. But I don't know. I wouldn't say if it was a white person who been there, if it was an Asian person who been there, they wouldn't have got shot. Yeah, so.
Are you aware of the events that are surrounding Oscar Grant and the cop who's just been sentenced? So how do you feel about the sentencing?
I feel that it was not a just sentence. He did kill a man. But I do feel like the case is a racial one because, as I've had this discussion many times with family and friends, it's more of a racial issue than a statement issue. Because I feel like if it was Pookie and them from down the street who shot him, it wouldn't have been a big deal. It wouldn't rallies. It wouldn't have been justice for Oscar Grant. Nobody would have cared. A week later, nobody would have known his name except for, oh, he died. But because it was a white man who shot him, it became this big old blown out thing that's blown out of proportion. Now, does it make it right now? I feel like if you kill somebody, you deserve to get the punishment there for you.
Yeah. So, my last question, do you feel it would have been different had the races of both the victim and the shooter been different?
I feel like it would have been the same thing. Because, people don't want to say it, but there is a lot of racial issues in this still going on. It's more quiet and subtle now, but it would have still been the same thing. Now, if it was same race on same race, I doubt it would have got as much publicity as it has. But as long as you mix the races, it's going to always be a big issue blown up way past where it is.
So here we are at the University of California, Berkeley, home to the free speech movement, Mario Savio, and perhaps one of the most liberal colleges in America. And yet 1 out of 20 interviewees even knew who Oscar Grant was or anything about the injustice that occurred on New Year's Eve of 2009. What is that?
On March 3, 1991, footage of the brutal beating of Rodney King, an African-American citizen, by 4 white LAPD officers was broadcasted on the news channels worldwide. For the next year, the media would replay this brutal video over and over again, depicting the raw brutality and emphasizing the racism it displayed. Then, just over a year later, on March 5, 1992, the 4 officers who had beaten King were brought to trial on charges of excessive use of force. At first, due to the fact that the beating received such vast amounts of coverage, it appeared as though it would be an open and shut case. However, when the officers' trial verdicts were read in Simi Valley, all 4 were acquitted. This outraged the Black community nationwide, starting a huge riot in Los Angeles that resulted in the death of 54 civilians, 7,000 arrests, and hundreds of millions of dollars worth of property damage. The importance of the Rodney King incident, the court's verdict, and the riots that ensued does not lie in the events themselves, but what they revealed about the racial tension that still existed not only in Los Angeles, but throughout America. The Rodney King incident, the riots that it incited, and the extensive media coverage of the event opened the eyes of the public to a topic that had been tiptoed around for several decades: racism. It was just over a century ago that African Americans received their freedom. One would think that more than 100 years would be enough for the racism and racial tension to abate. The Rodney King riots were an unfortunate yet flagrant sign that racial tension still exists. The brutality of the beating superimposed in the history of racism and the law enforcement in LA, as well as the extreme racial discrimination demonstrated in the trial of the officers, were the pinnacle of a long-standing and ever-building